Welcome, everybody. So this
Hi.
is, welcome, Ben.
Hey, thank you. Welcome, Mike.
Yep, and with us we also have a moderator, Ricardo. Welcome. I don't know if you can talk or not, but and then we also have in the back end from Coney, Laureline. So today we're going to talk about front-end web performance, and we have this 2-hour workshop, and we have so much information. We literally had to cut information out of this, even though we have a full 2 hours, which to
We could
me
have
is
filled
a little
4 hours
ridiculous.
pretty easily. Yeah.
Yeah, we could have filled up 9 hours.
It could be
We,
all
we're
day long.
we're
Yeah.
just gonna go to the end of the day and just make Laureline just cut us off. You know, she's
We'll
gonna
stop
hate
on
us.
Sunday sometime. Yeah.
Yep. So the first thing I want to say is just thank you. I want to say thank you for all the volunteers like Ricardo. I want to say thank you to everybody at Coney who's just been amazing to work with. I want to say thank you to all the folks at the Drupal Association and everyone else that makes this happen because yeah, it's pretty awesome. So my name is Mike Herschel. I'm a senior front-end developer at Lullaby. I'm also lead of the Drupal Olivero initiative, which is a new theme that's going into Drupal core. And it's in Drupal core now as experimental. It's super exciting. I'm passionate about all things web performance, and I'm from Florida in the United States.
And my name is Ben Morse, and I'm grateful to be here today. Thanks for inviting me to join your presentation. I'm a developer advocate at Google, where my job is to make it easier to make the web better for more people. So to make it simpler to make websites everyone can enjoy all over the world in as many circumstances as possible. And I am also in the United States in New Jersey, which is near New York,
Cool.
in case you were curious.
So someone paste this in the chat right here. This is a list of hyperlinks and
I can do that
notes and
here.
things like that. Yeah. So basically, we're gonna go through a bunch of stuff. We're gonna have links to various URLs and things that are very long, and this will save people a lot of frustration and typing and stuff like that. You got that, Ben?
It's all pasted in there.
Cool. So that is in maybe the discussion chat. Hopefully, I see it. Cool.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah,
As
and just keep that
We'll add
handy. I
more
don't,
links in there. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and if someone asks for that, just paste it in there again. So yeah, so here's what we're gonna learn today. We already did our intro, so we're already halfway through. Right? We are here at the overview, and that is it. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye. All right.
All right.
See you later.
All right.
A little
Well,
humor there. We call that humor. Funny stuff. That's
I just
called
imagine
humor.
everybody in front of their computers is laughing and just enjoying this, right?
What
So we're going to
do
talk
you think?
about
Come
what.
back. Wait, we'll get funnier. All right.
Yep, yep. The participant count goes down. We're going to talk about why make the web fast and what that even means. How do you know you're fast or not? We're going to talk about measuring that and how to do so. We're going to talk about useful techniques and no-nos. And yeah, so we're also going to talk about where to learn more. And then time permitting, at the end, we're going to do questions. So first of all, tell us about you. So we have, I'm going to, within the live poll, I'm going to activate a couple polls. So there's like this live poll option
Nice.
on there here, and so like, are you a front end developer? You a back end developer? Are you just hanging out? And where do you lie on the web performance like spectrum and stuff? And this will help us maybe like tailor our demos and stuff toward you.
You see live results here. The polls are adjusting as people actually vote, and
I
the
know
little
this
green
is
bars are moving around. This is neat.
this is pretty neat. I've never actually used this before, so that's pretty cool. So what I'm seeing right now so far is we're seeing like looks like about 40% front end devs, 50% back end devs, 10% just hanging out. And then as far as the experience with web performance, about 20% are just a little, 3% none, 50% is learning more, about a quarter knows a lot.
A lot. Yeah.
And we have
Gurus.
6% gurus in here, and hopefully you can maybe like correct everything that we're saying within the live chat.
Take over this talk. Hold on, I got
Yeah,
that backwards.
yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
What are you guys talking about? All right, so let's
All
talk about
right.
why make it fast. So Ben, this is going to be your section right here. Do you want to go ahead and talk about why make this fast?
Yeah, I'll say some words. And I guess a lot of you are pretty experienced with performance. So, really, if you know performance already and why it matters, this is more for people you're working with. Because I think the biggest problem with performance, honestly, isn't like what do we do? It's like we want to do these things, but we can't do these things because I want to get rid of these big JavaScript libraries on our site. I want to make sure our images are all compressed when they get uploaded. But people don't do that at my company or at my organization. Like I'll
Yep.
compress the images. Someone else will walk in tomorrow and upload a 4 MB hero image, not know it's a problem. Or someone will say, we must have that extra, JavaScript chat widget there on the screen. And people don't always know. So really, if you know these things already, this is ammo you can use for your own team. Tell them, hey, this actually matters. Let's go to the next slide here, please. The thing is with the internet that it's a wonderful place full of beautiful things and cool stuff. And you have total control of your site. You can add to it whatever you want to. This is the glory of the free and open web that we know today. The thing is that if your site has a lot of images on it, maybe some image carousels or sliders where you can slide images around the screen, maybe you've got a video or two, some JavaScript for various features on your site, some more third-party JavaScript, a framework, maybe a second framework, some pixel, some ads, some analytics and other things. Maybe you've got a few fonts on that. At a certain point, even if your design is more delicate than this design over here, your site's going to get slow. And people
Mhm.
can't appreciate your site because it'll be slow. Now, it's possible you're not going to notice this because you'll be working in your beautiful office or your beautiful home, or in my case, in an attic in my house, which used to be my music studio and is now where I spend my entire day all the time, every day, which is fine. If you're there in your home on a nice connection, you may not notice these things that much. If you go to a slower site, it could be somewhat irritating, but not a big problem. But in many cases, people are accessing your site on mobile devices. Usually, in most cases, people get to your site on a mobile device, like a phone or something like that. And maybe your users all have the latest iPhone or Galaxy from Samsung or whatever. Maybe they're on 4G connections all the time. But if they're like me, that isn't always the case. So back in the old days, I used to go to a place called an office. I would do what we called commuting. So I would actually go on a train to this place I've not seen since March called New York City. And on this train, I shared my Wi-Fi with 1,000 other people. And many sites didn't load at all, period. And I knew because, as you know, also, most sites that don't load that fast, they could load faster, but they've got some large images or extra JavaScript or other stuff that keeps them from loading that quickly. Because I was trying to deposit a check in my bank or access things for work. I knew it was possible to be faster. It just wasn't. And so it also, of course, people around the world have different kinds of experiences. Many phones, most new phones that are sold these days are lower powered Android devices. And as Mike will be telling you later on, these devices execute JavaScript slowly, sometimes 5 times, 10 times more so than a more quick device like, an iPhone. And people often have 3G connections out there. And I've experienced this a lot myself. The thing is, that the latest data that I show the latest data that I've seen showed, next slide please, that the average website takes 12 seconds to load on 3G. 12 seconds is kind of a long time. And it's worse than that because, in fact, it isn't just 3G out there. Next slide please. 40% of mobile connections worldwide are still 2G. 40%. And on 2G, many sites don't load ever at all. You'll get the web light version without the design. You'll get a screenshot of your site. Those kinds of things will happen. So it really does matter if you want to have a site that reaches everyone out there all the time, that there are many cases where performance is going to matter, not just a little bit, but a lot. So we think
Yep.
performance is important. Even if it's just 10% of your users, 30% of your users, whatever it is, it's going to matter. And if it was like a bug on your site that affected that many users, you'd fix that bug immediately. Let's go
Yep.
to the next slide over here. please. There's a lot of data out there and studies that talk about this. We won't go over too many of these things, but there's a couple of things that are newer, well, not always newer studies. There's a new article here at bit.ly/web-vitals-science. A link I'll put into that repo in a minute or two, I promise. Sorry, I didn't do it yet. This study showed that 2-second delay in a site loading raises user dissatisfaction and lowered their intent to return to the site. That was just a 2-second delay. Next slide, please. Another study showed that users noticed when buttons took more than 100 milliseconds to respond. So in this study, they increased the delay in buttons responding from 70 milliseconds to 100 milliseconds. People noticed this and they didn't like it. When they then went beyond that to 150 milliseconds, they thought these buttons are broken. They're not working well. The quality of the buttons is slower. They're just not good buttons. And really, buttons are fine if they look good, but if they respond slowly, people will say, my phone isn't working, my site is broken, and they'll blame you for it eventually and use someone else's site. So tell your marketers that. One more slide over here, please. Also, a different study that mobile users lost attention after 4 to 8 seconds. So remember that 12 seconds for the average site in 3G. If your site's loading in 12 seconds, people after a little while, 4 seconds, 5 seconds in, might just leave your site and press the button at the bottom of the phone and go play Among Us. Stop that from happening, make the site faster. You can use all these things to convince people on your team. But maybe your team says, we don't really care about users. All we care about is, next slide, please, money. So, all right, does it actually affect revenue? And the answer is, surprisingly, yes. Not in all cases. I've seen cases people improve performance and revenue didn't increase. But in many cases, you improve performance, revenue does get better because it's a better experience. People want to stay on the site for longer. They feel better about your site and they want to do more things, even buy more stuff. I'm going to drink some water now because it's still early over here.
I want to say, notice that how Ben used euros in his slide here, as opposed to like something like dollars. Good job.
I use real money in this slide. Yeah, I'm really sorry I couldn't get to go to Europe for this whole occasion here. I'm stuck in my country, but we'll get through it. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of studies showing that revenue tends to increase. This one over here mentioned that mobile sites that loaded in less than 2 seconds had a 15% higher conversion rate. That's some real money. And plenty of companies have discovered this also. A lot of large companies work on performance because they have the resources to do it and because they realize that it matters. Amazon, Google, Facebook, and next slide, please, eBay, for example, did this big speed push last year because they found that if 100 milliseconds was cut off of the load time, they had 0.5% increase in add to cart. So a second might be a 5% increase. This kind of thing actually matters. And again, for companies that sell more things in more developing countries with those slower connections, you see cases where people actually double their revenue or cut their abandonment time in half, for example, or abandonment rate rather. So the money matters. Let's say you say, okay, we don't care about money either, or the users, we care only about search. You're talking to your SEO person at your company. Well, it matters in search too. If you go to the next slide, please. This is something that Google did to improve speed on the web. Actually, in 2010, Google first included speed as a ranking factor in desktop searches. In 2018, Google extended this to mobile searches as well. So for the last 2 or 3 years, it's been true that sites that have faster mobile speed will rank a little higher. It's a ranking factor. This happened a little while ago. And next slide, please. Another change was announced in May of this year. So they announced this with a bunch of advance notice because everyone's at home and people are disrupted by the current situations in the world. But they announced in May that there'd be a new ranking factor, a new signal called page experience. And page experience is simply a combination of something called Core Web Vitals, which is a series of metrics about speed, interactivity, and content stability, which we'll be discussing in a few minutes. It's a combination of that and also things they already have, like HTTPS, those kinds of things. So they announced they were going to be making a new ranking factor. And now in November, it was announced that this would actually happen in May of next year. So this new ranking factor will be hitting in May of 2021. And not only will it be a ranking factor in search, but Google's top stories carousel, which is used by publishers to have their pieces right up there and easy to see. Look at this. Thank you for this video. There's an actual video of the top stories carousel in action. This was reserved for pages that use AMP, that were valid AMP pages. This is being changed. So next year, any page can appear in this carousel if it meets Google's news guidelines, but they'll be prioritizing pages that meet page experience guidelines. So this is really exciting. I worked in AMP a lot myself, and I'm pretty excited about this because people won't be forced to use AMP anymore if they want to get top stories carousel. They can use whatever they want to, but we do think that it's a lot easier to meet these guidelines using AMP than not using AMP, because AMP makes you be fast. We'll be discussing all of these things later on today as well. So there's some reasons to be fast: users, the money, and Google search. I think other search engines do similar things about prioritizing pages that are faster. Last slide for me for a few minutes here. The nice thing is that it isn't that hard. We'll be discussing a lot of things today that are elaborate and interestingly cool for programmers, like making sure you have 60 frames per second animation, blocking along JavaScript tasks, all kinds of techniques. But the basics for most sites are pretty simple. For most sites out there on the web, there are things like a large image or some sort of other, low-hanging fruit, as we say, that you can fix in an hour or two, make your site a lot faster. So the basics of performance aren't that hard, don't require a lot of time. Most sites just need those basics done because they're still kind of challenging to remember to actually do. And then you go from there, do the more kind of cool programmery things. That is it for me for a little bit. I think Mike.
Yeah. So
another reason. Yes, last reason. Most important.
One more reason.
After sites.
Do it for me. I get frustrated by slow websites. If the website's slow, I have I'll completely throw my monitor across the room.
That's wasteful.
Yeah.
Save those monitors from destruction. Make your site faster.
So let's talk about what makes a website fast. I like this video right here. These are a bunch of race cars. You can see that they're all fast, but check out those ones on the right. They're a lot faster. So like this begs the question, how do you measure everything is fast, maybe because it's traveling at the speed of light, but how do you measure it, right? So we're going to talk a little bit about that right here as soon as I can advance the slide properly. But before we do that, we actually have a demo, and hopefully this is a good demo right here. Are you?
That wasn't there before. That's great.
Yeah. So Ben, if you would, I want you to maybe just play us some music here as we're doing this. Okay.
Okay.
I'm on. Yeah. Let me know if you're ready here.
Green. Yeah, I'm ready for you. Okay.
All right. I'm not. I'm gonna start. So the first thing I'm gonna do right here is I'm gonna set ourselves to fast 3G, and then I'm gonna start in 3, 2, 1, go. Now, if you're not familiar with it, this is the Jeopardy waiting music. Jeopardy is a what do you call it? A game show here in the U.S. So this is a normal experience, maybe while you're at a conference.
Running out of music. Are we still loading?
Keep on going.
We're still loading here.
Keep on going.
Sound change. Okay.
There we go. Keep on going. Keep on going. We're almost done. All right. I think that's good. Thank you. I'm going to clap for everybody. Everybody clap here. So we're going to talk about image optimization here. You can see that there's a 6 megabyte image in there. So obviously, I'm pretty sure everybody's attended conferences in real life, and if not, they're a lot of fun. But when you go to conferences, there's a whole bunch of people on the same Wi-Fi, and typically you get very, very slow connection. connections. As we get into performance, I want to differentiate between back-end and front-end performance. When people think Drupal performance, a lot of people will talk about things like caching and SQL queries, and PHP profiling and APC and PHP FPM and all that fun stuff. We're not talking about that. We're talking about front-end performance. And so you're gonna hear like things like largest contentful paint, page rendering, painting, compositing, external scripts, and things like that. So that's what we're going to talk about. If you're interested in the back-end side of things, including caching and performance, there's a great talk by Fabian Franz, who really
Cool.
knows his stuff. But I'm sorry, Ben, because this actually happened yesterday. But these are all these are all recorded, and like obviously, without any back-end performance, your front-end performance is going to be slow. So if your back-end takes a couple seconds to load, well, your front-end can't go faster than that. I guess unless you have like some type of PWA stuff going on and it just loads. So maybe it can. Front-end performance is important. 80 to 90% of the end-user response time is spent on front-end. Start there. This is a quote from Steve Souders, who was a very smart person. Steve Souders was, I believe, like the chief performance officer at Google. Now he works for a company. Does he work for either Fastly or SpeedCurve? I'm not even sure, but he works in web performance, and he's written a lot of articles about it. So let's kind of get into some front-end performance metrics right here. The first thing that is mostly a measurement of the back-end processes is basically time to first byte. And what that is when as soon as the browser starts that navigation, how long does it take to get that first little bit of HTML back? Things that affect the time to first byte are number one, are things like your DNS, which is when your computer tries to look up the IP address of the server. TLS connection, to establish like a secure connection to the server. And then obviously things like the backend performance response time, like that will affect your time to first byte. We also, another important metric is first contentful paint. First contentful paint is actually when stuff shows up on the screen. There's a lot that needs to happen before it shows up on the screen we're going to talk about, but things that are important here are like things that are called within the critical path, and things that the browser needs before it can even render are things like the HTML. It needs all the CSS. Depending on how you have it set up, it might need the web fonts, and it needs to download and process all the JavaScript that's in the head that's not either deferred or asynced. There's time to interactive. Time to interactive is that thing where like when does your website become interactive? And if you ever had your phone and you go to a website and you hit the button and then nothing happens. And so what do you do naturally? Well, you hit it like more forcefully because you think, well, hey, if I hit it more forcefully, that's going to make a difference. That's really not going to make a difference if you haven't figured that out yet. It is the JavaScript main thread is busy and it's not responding to user inputs, and the site is not interactive yet. You can see this on this particular chart right here, where like the yellow is all the JavaScript processing, and right when that's done is when the website was interactive. Something else that's important is the speed index, and the speed index is basically a number, and you can get this by running the Lighthouse reports. We're going to demo this a little bit later. The speed index is basically how quickly your page approaches visually complete. So like for example, if I have two web pages and they both maybe finish loading right at 12 seconds, but one of them's pretty much loaded all throughout the process, that will have a higher speed index score. And Ben, do you want to maybe talk about this slide?
Yeah, I pressed the wrong button there for a minute, but I think I'm back now. I want to zoom. There we go. Now I'm bigger.
Yep, I can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I'm too big now. I'm going to get a little smaller. That's good. Okay, I'm a good size. So yeah, by the way, my favorite was always speed index. It's as he was saying, it's how fast things above the fold, above the place before you actually scroll down appear. It's a nice one. and web page test is a fine tool. So we're going to discuss here, I mentioned before, this thing called Core Web Vitals, which is this new thing that Google and other folks have been discussing for the last couple of years, ways to measure speed that are maybe more standardized. The idea here is to measure these three kinds of things and to find numbers that kind of tell you whether these things are happening. The first one being, we're discussing all along here, how fast does the page actually load? So you're looking at your screen, is anything happening or not really? Number two, interactivity. So is it responsive? Is it the case that you see things appearing, but you try to scroll or press a button, nothing actually happens? Or does it respond immediately? And third, visual stability, which is when you're looking at the screen there, do things kind of appear and stay there? Or as they load, do things shift around a lot, which can be jarring and confusing and really reduce user trust? Next slide, please. These things are supposed to measure that Core Web Vitals. These are LCP, largest contentful paint, and FID, first input delay, and CLS, cumulative layout shift. Each of these corresponds to those three things. We'll discuss each of those in turn. And if you can press the button there, you see a cool number drop down. It is thought that you should be able to meet these metrics here, 75% of page loads. So for LCP, 2.5 seconds or less is considered good. And for FID, 100 milliseconds is considered good. And for cumulative layout shift, it's a measurement that's a new one, 0.1. And to hear about why these things are all true, you can look in Mike's repo. Web.dev has a lot of discussion about how these things were chosen and the discussion process that went on. The people at Google, W3C Performance Group, and various performance experts around the world who discuss these things. And by the way, they've been discussed a lot, but they're also an evolving standard. So they'll be changing next year because the web is always changing. So next year, I mean, they're not going to be changing a lot, but there'll be new things coming in. There'll be tweaks made as people give feedback and as the web, again, is always adapting to new technologies. Next slide, please. One cool thing about this, so this is a new thing, is that these come from the Chrome User Experience Report. So people that use Chrome who've consented to this, their data on speed is put together, aggregated, anonymized, and put into this large public database. It's open. Anybody can query this. You can look at your site, your competitors' sites, other things on the web, and see what kinds of things happen as they load. It's full of tons of interesting and fascinating data. Actually, a side note, Rick Viscomi, who did much of the work on this, spoke at DrupalCon Europe 2 years ago, was telling me that he got to eat schnitzel and all this cool food. So once again, I miss the idea of traveling to interesting places. Not this time, I traveled upstairs to our attic. So next slide, please. The first of these things, LCP, largest contentful paint, or if you want to say it this way, Contentful Paint, is pretty simple. It measures how long it takes for the biggest thing above the fold to appear. So by above the fold, I mean the stuff you see on your phone here or device before you scroll down. So the biggest thing there, whether it's a hero image, a block of text, whatever it is, how long does this thing take to appear? It was chosen because it's a good proxy for what users regularly perceive as, is this thing loading or not? And because it's very easy to define. Next slide, please. FID, first input delay, is the time between when things appear on the screen. Sorry, that's not right. I'm thinking of something else. The time between when the user first interacts with the page and then something actually happens. So things appear, a menu button appears, the user taps on this button. Does it actually do anything or not? They try to scroll the screen. Does it actually scroll, or is there a delay before the scroll occurs? This is a case where 100 milliseconds or less feels kind of natural and good. It was like 300 milliseconds, a third of a second almost. It feels weird and slow and janky. Users think this thing is kind of broken. By the way, I have to put links over there in the top right-hand corner. There's information about all these things in more detail at web.dev. Next slide, please. Finally, cumulative layout shift. This is a measure of stability. It's that thing where you're loading up a page and things begin to shift around. So I'm home a lot these days, doing a lot of cooking, looking at a lot of recipe sites. I find often I'm looking at a recipe site and it starts to load up. I see some text there. Someone's talking about, I traveled once to Milan and saw this person making pasta, whatever. And then suddenly it moves around because an image loads in. The image's dimensions weren't declared in advance. The image loads in, so it takes up part of the screen. All the text moves around. The browser reflows the page. Takes a couple, a little while to do that. And then I'm looking at the text where I just found it now, and it moves again because a video just popped in showing something else. And looking at that now, and it moves around again because maybe a video ad pops in. I'm watching a video ad instead of looking at my text. So these shifts as the page load don't feel good. They feel unstable. You're looking at a newspaper or a book. It doesn't do that. And you don't want that to happen. So this is a measurement of that. This is measured, I can describe it in more detail if you're curious, but basically it's the sum of the, how do I say this? If you take the parts that move, think about how big they are, and then take how far they move, multiply those things together. Take all the parts that move, add those things up. That's cumulative layout shift. So each part of the screen that moves, take the percentage of the screen which moves, how far it moved, take the product of those things, add them up, and you get this nice new score. There's a new API called the Layout Instability API that measures this. If that's kind of hard to understand as I kind of babble through this here, please look at web.dev/CLS. Next slide, please. So they did a little study and they found that when a site meets these thresholds, users are 24% less likely to abandon page loads, 24% less likely. So we think these things actually do work. Next slide, please. Next question is, of course, how do Drupal sites do on this? And drum roll, please. There's no drum roll because there's the next slide. And I can do it on my keyboard here, couldn't I? All right, never mind. That was not appropriate timing-wise. It's already there. So it turns out that on desktop devices, about 35% of Drupal sites pass Core Web Vitals. On mobile, about 22%. So this is not most sites, but this is not that bad because look at the different metrics over here. You'll see that most Drupal sites pass each metric on most kinds of devices. Just put it all together, passing all these things is harder than passing just one of them. Notice especially first input delay on desktop is spectacular. It's harder on mobile, of course, because this is from real world data and mobile devices tend to be slower than desktop devices and be on worse connections. Also, further good news for Drupal, and part of why I'm interested in being here today, is that of the top 5 CMSs in the world, of these top 5 CMSs, WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, Wix, and Squarespace, Drupal was the best and largest contentful paint, and it was the best in cumulative layout shift. So CMSs are challenged in general because people don't always have control of the code. You're adding modules or in some cases plugins and things which add their own code, their own CSS. It's hard to control all these things or know what's doing what. This is part of why CMSs tend to have these kinds of problems. But I think Drupal is extra promising and the community is really strong. And I want to be here to just kind of talk about performance, learn from everybody here, and really find out how to make things even better than they are. And in fact, you stick around, in 9 hours from now, at the end of this workshop, we're going to have some ideas, some things that are current issues right now that are either happening or being discussed for how to make Drupal sites just better for everybody. So how Drupal core can by default make all sites faster.
9 hours.
Or whatever what actually is. I've lost track.
Yeah, more like 10, 12. So measuring performance. Let's talk about measuring performance here. We're getting into like the more of the like the big content here. And I also want to note how we have kilometers per hour as opposed to miles per hour. I looked up the correct one.
A real
for the graphic.
Yes, it's legit.
But this is Ben's slide, and he used feet for this measuring tape. And this kid is wearing Crocs. Yeah, so we're going to talk. Yeah, he's upset.
What is a foot?
Yeah, using imperial units.
5?
Yeah, 25 meters. I don't know. So let's talk about like tools. We're gonna do some demos and run through some tools here. We're gonna talk about Chrome developer tools. I'm gonna talk about that. Ben's gonna talk about page speed insights and go into Lighthouse. I'm gonna talk about webpagetest.org, which is amazing. Ben's gonna go back to Search Console and Chrome UX report, and I'm really interested personally in the Chrome UX report because I've only used that in the most basic sense. So yeah, so I'm gonna do DevTools here. So let's kind of do this. So the first thing that I'm gonna do right here is I'm gonna load up Chrome Canary here, and I like Chrome Canary because number one, it has the newest stuff. Chrome Canary is like 2 versions in the future. There's some stuff that can be broken, but when you're loading up developer tools, it's nice to either kind of open up a new profile as a guest or just open up like something like Canary. And the reason is so you don't have extensions loaded. If you're profiling a site, it will profile extensions because that's JavaScript that's running on the page. So yeah. So let's open up a website here. My hometown newspaper is Gainesville.com, and I'm going to profile that because it is it's a typical newspaper website here in the U.S. and has a lot of JavaScript and it has a lot of ads. And the newspapers here in the U.S. they're kind of not doing so well because the internet's kind of eating them for eating up a lot of their business, and so they keep it. So they're trying to fix that by jamming in more ads so they can make more revenue, right? So the first thing I'm going to do right here is I'm going to go to the Performance tab over here. And well, actually, even before that, I'm going to move this down to horizontal right here. I'm going to, one thing I like to do is before I do a performance profile, I actually like kind of delete the bodies because if it's taken to screenshots, sometimes the screenshots will show up. And I'm going to kind of put this in another window. I'm going to move the page over here and get back to DevTools. I'm going to go to the Performance tab, and I am going to hit this like little refresh button up here. You can, I think, hit it here too, and it says Start Profiling and Reload the Page, and this is really useful right here. So just
Gainesville, because I had Mike before my first band's first drummer was from Gainesville. He was really
no
great.
way.
He was incredibly good.
Yeah.
After 2 shows, he quit the band and moved back to Gainesville. So
Yeah, well, Gainesville is an awesome place. Gainesville is in north central Florida. So yeah. So one thing that I did not do here, just for the sake of brevity, is I normally try to run this at, I run my profiles in fast 3G or slow 3G. Right now, I just did it online, which is just full bandwidth, but normally you do this stuff in fast 3G or slow 3G. So right now I'm at the Performance tab, and hopefully everybody can see. So I'm gonna kind of walk through a couple things right here, and I'm gonna use, I have like a little touchpad here, and I can kind of move around. And I like this because you can kind of zoom in and zoom over and things like that. So the first thing I want to show is this little chart up here. It shows a couple of different colors here. You're going to see the yellow. The yellow is scripting. You're going to see the purple. The purple, I believe, the purple is layout or rendering, and the green. If you see green in here, you think you see green right in here, over right in here. The green is actually painting. So you can see, like, initially we have like a whole bunch of JavaScript that's coming in right here, and within here you can also something. I mean, maybe zoom out a little bit so we can see better. You can see the network waterfall in here. Now you're going to see the network waterfall in a couple places on the network tab up here, but you also see it right here. And this is useful because you can use this to compare, like, as you go out, it changes along with like things like the primary main thread right here. A couple things that you're going to see up here on the timeline is you're going to see these like little red ticks up here and things like that. These red ticks up here are just like when the page's frame rate drops below a certain criteria. I don't really know what that is. It might be like 30 frames a second or something like that. And this is highlighting when DevTools thinks this page is janky. When you like kind of scroll up and down or you move stuff and the page doesn't respond yet, I always call that jankiness. That's what DevTools is highlighting right there. And so now you can see these. I'm going to expand this main thread right here, and you can see this flame chart right here. And this is like really, really useful because so the way this flame chart does is or works is it'll show like a function that calls something else as it works its way down, but it's not the height of these items doesn't matter so much as is the length of them. You want shorter tasks, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but you want shorter tasks, and the reason is because if you have a long task similar to this right here, you can see that this task right here is 93 milliseconds. While this task is running, the website is not responding to event listeners. So if someone taps something, it's not doing anything, and that's why this like little red bar is showing up right here. It kind of highlights those for you. A lot of times you can kind of get in here. I'm going to expand this up here. You can get in here and you can actually see, you can click, hold on, yeah, right here. You can actually click and you can see what's causing this right here. So I can see there's literally a script called PB&J sandwich, like peanut butter and jelly sandwich. What could this script be doing? You can actually click on this. You can go into the sources panel, and it'll actually show you how long each line takes. You can pretty print this by hitting this pretty print button up here, or these like little brackets down here. And you can kind of go down and it says like, all right, well, this takes 0.3 milliseconds, and you can kind of scroll down and you can maybe find some of these ones that take a long time. That can be really useful when profiling and debugging. Let's see what else I need to go through right here. Let's go into the network tab. The network tab is really useful. I recommend that everybody kind of like check this out. Just look at it, because look at it on normal sites so you know what a normal site looks like. Look at it on sites like this that have a lot of JavaScript so you can identify. I'm going to reload right here just so we can get kind of a quicker. You can see this connection view at the top right here, and you can see various connections coming in. And I'm going to hit the stop recording button up here. You can see the waterfall view right here. When you click on this right here, you can see like, all right, well, it looks like right here we're connecting to a different domain. So you can click on this and you can see like, all right, well, it takes 18 milliseconds for a DNS lookup. The SSL and connection takes like about 200 milliseconds, and then the time to first byte is around 200 milliseconds. You can see this type of stuff right here, and it's kind of useful. But what I find really useful is sorting by size right here. If you sort by size, you can identify your largest resources. Typically, these are images. These images right here seem to be optimized pretty well. You can also filter at the top. You can see there's like all these tabs right up here. You can filter by images, and you can see like the types of images. You can see there's a WebP, which is a modern image format right here. And then you can click on JavaScript. You can see the largest JavaScript files, which are all like relatively reasonable here. 127 kilobytes is relatively reasonable. Something else that's very useful with this type of stuff is that there's this little text box up here you can filter on. So you can filter like things like domain. That I can filter based on Gainesville.com, and it'll show me everything that comes in directly from Gainesville.com. There's not that much right here, but you can also filter on things that come in from different domains by adding a little minus in front of there. And what's really interesting is when you're adding like a minus, you can actually profile against like different scripts. So like, let's say I see this script right here coming from TinyPass. I'm not quite sure. Or actually, there was a PB&J script. I don't even know what that was. Hold on, PBJ, peanut butter and jelly script. I have no clue what this is right here. But what I can do is I can right click on this and I can hit block request URL. This opens up a pane at the bottom right here, and it'll block this. So if I reload this, the script is not going to load, and it's just gonna block it. And what that enables me to do, it enables me to profile with and without that. And if you do multiple profiles, you can actually access them. So if I say if I hit reload again right here with this, after this is done, I'm just gonna hit stop to get this done a little bit quicker here. You will actually see a drop down of your different profiles up here. I think it stores up to 5, and that's like kind of useful because it actually gives you like a little, kind of a little comparison right here. It would be nice. Maybe this is a feature that we could ask for, Ben, is a way to like compare this and large screens, like different profiles like that. That's super useful. What else am I wanting to look at here on the network tab? So I'm going to go back to the network tab right here, get out of this pane, click out of this. Something else that's really useful is looking at your total HTTP requests down here. So, and you can see your total file sizes. Now, HTTP requests, we used to try to limit those as much as possible, but if you're using like newer protocols such as HTTP2 and HTTP3, that's not as big of a deal. And you can see that there's a protocol column here that says H2 or H3, that's HTTP2 and HTTP3. And of course, you see some coming down under HTTP1 right there. A couple other really interesting columns that you're going to see here is the initiator column. And so I can say like, well, why am I loading this main.gr script here? Like, where the heck is this even coming from? And I can see like the initiator right here is this right here, or this pixel. I can say like, all right, well, what's loading this image right here? This image is being loaded by this script. If I see index up here, that means it's included in the direct HTML. That's really useful when tracking stuff down. Something else that's really cool here is the priority. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but the priority column is how the browser prioritizes content, and that's pretty useful. Now, with HTTP2, the server can actually prioritize or shoot down the content initially too. So there's different ways to do that. And I was actually, Ben and I were looking at something a little bit yesterday, and I was some of that stuff even confuses me. Something that's really useful here is, I'm going to sort by waterfall, is you can see the time to first byte right here when I go to timing up here. So I can see, I'm going to click on the Gainesville.com, and you can see the time to first byte right here is 32 milliseconds. That's excellent, actually. A couple other useful things that we're going to see right here is, I like this, there's an option up here for large request rows right here. You see this checkbox up here, I'm checking right here, it's large request rows. And this will actually show you the uncompressed and compressed size. This is like with and without gzip or compression. So this enables you to identify things that might not be gzipped, like, which is pretty valuable. Gzipped, if you're not, compression, there's a couple different ways to compress stuff, and gzipping is the most popular. But when the servers shoot data down to the browser, they typically just kind of almost zip it up, compress it, and then the browser behind the scenes just uncompresses everything, and it happens really, really quickly. That's best practice to do that, and you want to make sure you're doing that. And a couple other useful things within Chrome Developer Tools that are performance related is, I'm going to open up the panel at the bottom, and I'm doing this by hitting the escape button right here. And I think there's actually like, show panel or something up here, maybe, I don't know, but I just usually just hit the escape button to open that up. And there's a rendering, you can click down here and you can bring up additional options. So there's rendering right here. And there's a bunch of really cool like runtime things right here. So you have things like paint flashing. And if I do paint flashing and I move this around, and you can see that there's some green flashing coming in here. And
really cool.
these are
yeah.
These are repaints happening right here. Now, you can see like there's a repaint happening when I hover because the hover state's changing. That's not so much of a big deal. But if I scroll, like I've seen pages before where you scroll down and the whole thing is turning green. That means you're repainting on scroll, and that's very bad. That will make your page like feel very janky as you scroll. And it's the same thing for animations. Another really cool thing here. Let me just kind of see if I can go back and forth. There's a there was a FPS meter. I don't see it here. These things constantly change right here. There was an FPS meter that would show like how many frames per second that you have, and normal frames per second is 60 frames per second. There's also like a couple cool things. Like I've used a scrolling performance before, and I haven't really figured out exactly how it works. I probably need to look into that. But all these things in here can be like really, really useful. This is brand new. It looks like disable local fonts. I haven't used this before. So like if you're using like the @font face rule, you can actually load local fonts if they're available. And this maybe gives you an option to disable those. So you have to load them from the network when you're testing out your website. There's also layout borders. Layout borders is kind of useful. You can see there's like these blue, and there'll normally be like orange borders in here too, and that's really interesting. I don't know how useful it is, but it's like interesting because when the browser's putting together your web page, it creates like different layers, which that can then move around very efficiently. There's other options in here like disable AVIF and disable WebP. So say you're using modern image formats and you want to see what those look like. Like if those are not available, you can check those right there. So these are all like fantastic tools, and I'm probably covering less than 10% of them. And honestly, there's like documentation on all these, but the best way is just like to get in here and just like start screwing around with stuff. Like I do this all the time. Like I don't even really know what this highlight add frames is, but I might mess with it.
There's a lot
have you heard of that?
Here. No, there's so much
Yeah,
stuff that's packed in every corner of DevTools.
Yeah,
like the whole area where
really
you can modify slow animations down that you're testing out with CSS and try different colors and speeds and things. All this stuff squashed in every corner of DevTools.
Yep, there's the animations right here. You can slow them down. There's all these. Coverage is really interesting right here. There's a coverage tab, and
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, you can. I'm gonna hit reload, and then I'm gonna hit stop right here, and it will actually show me in here the percentage of the file that is actually being actively used. This is useful for CSS or things like that. Say if you have like a monolith CSS file or a monolith JavaScript file, I can maybe look at this particular file and I can say, well, hey, like at this given point on this given page, I'm only using around 80% of this, or not 80%, but like 20% of this. Now this is like, of course, this has a little bit of limitations. Like if you look at your CSS file and it says you're only using like maybe 20% of it, but it's not covering things like hover states unless you actually move your mouse over the hover state and it invokes that. So this is the type of stuff that just gives you a basic idea on where to look, as opposed to just like, cut stuff out.
Common. Look at the websites out there. You'll see they often use about 10% of the CSS. 15%. Using 25% of CSS actually is a lot.
Is there anything in here that you think I'm missing before we switch back over to you, Ben?
There's more stuff, but you said a lot of things. I know we're already about an hour in, so I say we should keep on going.
Are we really? Geez, yeah, we got to get out of here. All right, so let's switch back to the slides. And
8 hours left.
8 hours left. Page speeds insights. So Ben, you're going to share your screen, right? So this might be a time for Laureline to switch to your window. So if you're there, Laureline, switch over. All right, yeah. And no, we are still on mine.
No, she's
we are still
getting a burger at this point.
Oh, yeah, let's see.
Is that me or you?
All right, yeah.
That's me.
I think that's you. Yeah. All right. Hey.
Yeah, we appreciate it. So hi again. This is me. I'm Ben. Also, my little earbuds here are kind of popping out of battery, so I hear you sometimes in one ear or the other ear or no ears, but it's all right. I'm just going to talk, so who cares what I can hear? So PageSpeed Insights is a tool that you can use for yourself, but also if you're an expert, as you already probably are, and talking to your marketer, your product manager, whatever, the CTO, the CEO, someone who's not quite as programmery, then they can use this tool for a friendly interface. This also uses the same API now as Lighthouse, and it gives you all the things I talked about before with Chrome User Experience Report and Core Web Vitals. Let's try this out now. PageSpeed Insights. So I was told this was okay to do this. I'm going to use the Drupal site. Often I use a Google-owned site because we also have sites that have issues. But PageSpeed Insights, I'm going to go and look at Drupal.org. Someone's saying you're seeing a black screen. Are you not seeing my?
I see your screen properly. Does anybody else see the screen? Can anyone else see his screen?
Black screen. Well, okay, this is a black screen, and this screen is just pure black. We're making the screen one color because it's beautiful and simple. And simplicity is part of design.
Yeah.
Laureline, help us out.
And Laureline, if you're here, all the attendees.
I'm going to reshare my screen. How about that? Because maybe that'll help.
Well, yeah. All right.
Shared in case somehow that I forgot what I was sharing. So now I'm sharing again, and I'm wondering if there's any.
All right, Laureline, if you can maybe try to make Ben's screen active again.
I like that little hexadecimal number sign.
Okay.
00 there.
All right, for the attendees, how is it looking now? It looks good on my screen again. It's up. All right. Yeah. All right. They see it.
Maybe
cool.
See, I turned it off and on again, and now it's happy. It fixes so many things in this world. All right, there it is. PageSpeed Insights. I should have done this. I made a mistake because this is always slow to run because it's running this on actual phones or devices somewhere in the world. I should have done this while it was black, but I didn't. So I'm typing in the URL over here, Drupal.org. And what it will do now is not only will it retrieve data from the Chrome User Experience Report, but it will actually test out the site live on an actual device stored somewhere. By the way, fun fact, web page test, which Mike mentioned before, used to be run by one person. And actually, there are a bunch of phones and devices in his basement. They ran it for everybody in the world. But now it's not like that anymore. Now it's better. So here's Drupal.org. So actually, I think this was 11 yesterday. We did this in our run through, and it's down to 10. So we've lost a point. So I need to pick on this site, but Tim said it was okay to do this before. So this is all Tim's fault. And again, a lot of sites there are things we missed because it's easy to miss the stuff. So this tool over here gives you some things that are simple, like this number here, 10, which is the score between 0 and 10. No, 0 and 100. So, less than 50 is considered to be needs improvement. Over 90 is really pretty good. And here it shows a screenshot of the page on a mobile device and some scores over here. Who would call during my talk? Do you believe the nerve of this person to call? I can't believe that. All right. Please don't call me now. So it gives you these Core Web Vitals metrics, plus also first Contentful Paint, which also is useful. And you see that cumulative layout shift is good. Some things aren't quite as good. And Tim's calling me and telling me to stop doing this org. You can see then actually, so this is field data, which is from the Chrome User Experience Report from actual real users, and then lab data. They tested it right now on an actual device and found some things were slow. Time to interactive was very long because it took a long time to load up the actual page. The little blocking time was high, all these things. Cumulative layout shift was stellar. It didn't shift at all. And then
these numbers are in 3G, correct?
It used to do fast 3G. I'm not sure what it does anymore, to be honest. It might have been changed to something else. But looking at the numbers here, it's probably still fast 3G because that's pretty big numbers, as they say. And then looking over here, it gives you actual things you can do to help out. So the biggest thing over here is deferring off-screen images. Also, notice it thinks these things should be, instead of being JPEGs, it could be WebP or something else. This is actually pretty easy to find. So I said before that often the biggest things are easy. I'm not going to do a long Chrome DevTools thing here, but let's look here real quick in Chrome DevTools. We're just going to load up without throttling it here, Drupal.org. So you can see what, here it is. Okay, there's our screen. There's stuff going on over there. All right, so let's take that out over here. So notice if we just sort by size here, I'm going to also zoom my screen so you can see it a little better. And you see that these things here that are the biggest one actually is YouTube's JavaScript. So if you can load YouTube later, do that because it has a lot of JavaScript. And then these images here, this Pinterest image, this MLS image over here. Let's stop filtering. You see more of it here. There actually is soccer in the US, although we call it soccer instead of football. This Boston City Hall. So these things are the big images that were being referred to over here when it said defer off-screen images. So defer, that means load these things later, like lazy load them. So where are these images on the screen here? We're looking at our page. I don't see the City Hall yet or the Major League Soccer Stadium. If you scroll down here, we don't see them yet. We don't see them yet. We don't see them yet. Where's the music? We don't see them yet. Yet. We don't see them yet. We don't see them yet. Here we go.
Wait.
This is it. I found it. So this image carousel over here, those are the images. So notice that they're way down.
So all those large images were loading just for that carousel?
I'm afraid so. And they load, I believe, not later, but with everything else. So as they're loading, I think other things are not loading because they can't, because these things are loading instead. So a few things should be happening. One is, of course, compressing the images so they're maybe 1/10 the size that they are. And also, I think they are not sized by device either. Let's just look here real quick at the image. And here it is, somewhere in there. Yeah, nothing here sizes it by device. So this should be also smaller on mobile than desktop. And also, this whole carousel should be deferred. And also, ideally, you would just load the first couple images in the carousel, load the other ones later on as they were actually going to appear sooner. So these things aren't hard to do, but we always forget these things. I've made tons of sites that have large images. We just forget because we just load the image and there they are. So how can this be fixed in the future? We have some ideas actually we'll be talking about at the end about how to make these things better in all Drupal sites. But also, in fact, a change already has been made in Drupal 9.1 to lazy load images automatically using the HTML attribute for lazy loading. So that will be soon part of more and more Drupal sites around the world. Kind of neat.
Yeah, it's exciting.
Anyway, so you get various bits of advice over here, and then more elaborate advice like, main thread work. You want to really, wow, all these things here, all the JavaScript that's running, get rid of those kinds of things. Actually, while we're at it here, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but looking at JavaScript quickly, this is the largest JavaScript file here on the page. It's pretty big, 282K. Looking at this file over here, notice that it is a thing that mostly contains a bunch of base64 encoded images.
Oh, wow.
And
that doesn't seem performant.
There's a lot of these things. That's all it is. The images, of course, will be larger because they're being base64 encoded, but also I doubt they're all being used on the page. There's about 1,000 of them. So
there's JavaScript that encodes images. So all these images have to be run through the JavaScript parser and then decoded from base64 before even being written on the screen, if they're being written on the screen.
Which they're probably not. So yeah, some module added this thing, and now there it is. So look for these hidden magical things. Actually, these are two things that are not hard to fix probably. The images and the JavaScript, and it'll be a lot faster and get a better score on PageSpeed Insights. So yeah, that's PageSpeed Insights. Nice tool, useful stuff. What else do we have over here as far as tools? Oh yeah, Lighthouse. I mentioned before that PageSpeed Insights uses Lighthouse's API. So it does. Lighthouse is the same kind of stuff, but it's only data from your own device, and it's done in Chrome DevTools. By the way, now that Microsoft Edge uses Chromium, I think the same DevTools are available there as well. And other browsers like Firefox have their own very nice DevTools. I just use Chrome because I work for Google, and we just do that because we're being loyal to the home team. So there also is this thing here called Lighthouse. You can run this kind of report here right there in the browser. It'll, again, run this on your own machine here and give you the same kinds of insights you see over here, but from your machine. So you can choose the speed that you want to throttle things to and just go from there. It also gives you an SEO report if you want, and accessibility. Lighthouse, a useful tool. You can also use Lighthouse yourself. There's an API you can use. You can then use it in your own continuous integration or monitoring So when someone actually loads a large image on your page or adds the JavaScript, you can find that and flag it right away. In fact, if I just search here real quick for Lighthouse GitHub, as I did just a minute ago, you can see there it is on GitHub. You can use this project in your own project and have fun with it. Also, I did
So
mention
Lighthouse is
before,
an npm. You can download it. You can download it and like run it on your own projects in your own node based like continuous integration too, right?
yes, that's a much better way to use it. That's a yes. Thanks for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
no
also
problem.
there's things called stack packs, and there's one here for Drupal. Lighthouse will give advice specific to Drupal for certain kinds of problems that it finds. And this also is again open source, and you can also contribute here and modify this if you want to.
That's pretty awesome.
What else do we have here? Search Console, again, really great for that SEO person or marketer on your team. Search Console will give you data from the Chrome User Experience Report. So it will tell you how many URLs are passing Core Web Vitals, how many need improvement, how many aren't. Notice in this case over here, this is kind of nice. You can see on the right here of this graph. Can I actually get a pointer? Yes, I can get a pointer. On the right over here, there was an improvement that was made. And notice someone took out a large image, something else good happened, and about half of the pages began suddenly being green. So that's nice. A useful tool. And what else have we here? Ah, yes, of course, the granddaddy of them all, the Chrome User Experience Report itself. You can go here and do your own analysis pretty quickly, which we will do right now in front of you. You can use BigQuery to query the data set and find out things about sites. I'll do over here for a shortcut. Oh my God. What is no, I should say yes.
That's a big cumulative layout shift there with that popping up.
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
official. Yes, Google says don't do that, so don't do it. So
Do as I say, not as I do.
like I was saying, we all have these problems. I can show you like 10 Google sites that have these kinds of problems too. Many
Yeah,
are
I
quite
know.
good. Some of them need a little bit of help, especially things with pictures of like beautiful phones and devices on them that are often too big. Anyway, we can go to like this site over here and say, let's actually profile google.com. And we'll get a little report here if we do this. Allow parameter sharing, yes. First, we get access to all the data. So it goes here and looks at Google Cloud and pulls out this giant amount of data. You can now do all this elaborate stuff. You can use various dimensions. So this is all the people that have used this site, google.com, around the world. You can pick those who've found it over 3G connections, 4G connections, all kinds of stuff. We're going to ignore all these parameters right now. Look at this. These are all P75. Again, we said before that it's best to have 75% of loads succeeding on your page. Let's create a report. Okay, let's do it. I said, let's do it. Okay. And now the magic is going to happen, I hope. And it creates a beautiful report for me. It's now going to populate with data. There you go. So this is, again, a pretty basic report. You can do much more elaborate things. Here's google.com, Core Web Vitals. Looks like there's actually a problem with CLS here on desktop. But in general, it's got good large Contentful Paint, good first input delay in general, but there's a problem there. So even at Google, these things do happen. This is not hard to do, and you can do much more than just this. You can write your own queries in BigQuery and find all kinds of data. Also, while I'm at it, the Web Almanac, I think, just came out again recently. I think this is just fresh from the presses here using this Chrome User Experience Report data. It's got tons of stuff here about CMSs, look at that, and about CSS, JavaScript on the web, PWAs, all kinds of stuff over here. If you're curious about this, look at this later. It talks about CMS, market shares, and all kinds of things here that are useful. LCP and various CMSs. Look at this. Here it is. Here's Drupal. As I said before, it was #1 for largest Contentful Paint, and there it is. All right. I think that's all I had to say. I think we're back to you, Mike.
All right. So Lorelei, we are. Yeah. Can you switch back to my screen, please? And I'm gonna. All right. Hopefully, so does everybody see my screen right now?
Oh, I see it, at least. I love
Yeah.
the discussion here in
Someone,
the chat. Nice stuff.
someone in chat, tell me if, all right, they see my screen properly. Cool. All right, so we're going to talk about webpagetest.org. Webpagetest.org is one of my favorite websites. It's like one of those internet gems that was, made for free by some guy in his basement, and it looks like it was designed in 2010 because it was. But at the same time, it's like it's kept up to date in the back end, and it has all the great metrics and stuff. So I'm going to give a quick overview of this, and then we're going to maybe get into uh, looking at waterfalls and things like that. So you have a sorry, I'm having a brain fart here. On the home page, you have an input where you can put in a URL, and at that point you can hit the start test button. Under the advanced settings, there's a couple different options in here. Like the connection, typically you want to do a 3G fast connection or something different, Well, obviously, I generally do 3G fast. If you're doing this right now, you can also specify. You can typically specify your location. Yeah, that's right up here, and you can also specify your browser. So what we're going to do right here, I'm going to kind of even before we do this, I also want to say like that it's useful to create an account and log in. And the reason that you want to log in up here is because you'll have a test history. And the test history is just useful if you want to go back and look at your tests here. So you're going to see this is going to load at some point. For the past year, I probably could have done that. In the meantime, I'm going to just go ahead and start a profile right here, and we'll just do Gainesville.com again. Gainesville.com. Because Gainesville.com is a slowish website, so I'm just gonna, well, not slow, but it has a lot of stuff going on. So if you're doing this right now, like if you're following along, select a different test location, just so we don't like bog down one location. Test to run defaults to 3. If you're doing like a real world scenario, you can bump that all the way up to 9 through this. And I'm gonna just do 1 right here, and then you can add a label. And the label is really useful if you are doing things like creating videos and stuff like that. So I can just say normal or something like that here. There's a bunch of different options here. The most useful one is scripting. I'm gonna do like a little demo of some scripting a little bit later, but you can have it, you can pass in different options through scripting, and at that point, you know, compare different scenarios. So at this point, I'm going to hit the start test button, and this is going to run now. In the meantime, I have my log of tests over here, so I can just go ahead and click on. Well, this is no external domains. Let me see if I can find a normal one here. Yeah. So this, it'll take you to a result page that looks something like this. And I'm going to click on this, and it's going to give me a whole bunch of information right here. So the first thing that you see at the top up here is a lot of these metrics that we initially talked about. So you have like your time to first byte, your start render. I'm going to close out of Slack because people are trying to talk to me. And your largest contentful paint. You can see up here it actually says like web vitals here. This is something that's relatively new, and it shows your total blocking time. I'm not quite sure if that's different than the first input delay. My understanding, the total blocking time is basically from the difference between the largest contentful paint and when the page is interactive. You might know more on that, Ben, but it gives you all these metrics at the top up here. So at that point, we have we'll have the waterfall view down here, and this is really cool. It gives you a bunch of it gives you the keys up here where you can see these vertical lines coming down here. You have start render, first point, DOM interactive, and things like that. You can click on each of these, and it shows you things like priority in the protocol, and that's super useful. And what I typically like to look for here as I'm going through this is I like to find like that first start paint and see if there's any dependency on that. And this particular waterfall right here, it might not be the best for this, but like typically you'll see these vertical lines kind of spaced a little bit through. And if that first paint or start render is pushed back, you can kind of look at this waterfall view and you can kind of see like, well, what is this waiting on, you know? I think I have some examples of that coming up too. Hold on one second. Let me see if I have this a web page test waterfall. This is I set up a tugboat preview of lullabot.com with external fonts right here. And so you can see that you can see like the start first render and run first paint are pushed out. And you can see like, well, why are these pushed out? And the reason is because we're loading these external fonts. And once again, this is like an intentional performance regression. So you can kind of look, you can see, well, all right, well, in this particular case right here, we have to pull in this CSS. CSS is in the browser's critical path. It can't render without the CSS. So it pulls that down, and you can kind of look at things. There's a couple interesting things in here. A couple additional things that you're going to see within your web page test waterfall views. You can see reds are basically like 400 errors. You can see 405. You know, these are not loading for whatever reason. The yellows are redirects, so you can see like 302s or 301s or things like that. When you're looking at these connections right here, you will see these like, you know, DNS connection, SSL, and all this type of stuff coming in, and it gives you an idea of why this has taken the amount of time that it takes. You can see the various different types of resources up here. You can see there's light and blues and things like that. Now the difference is, let's go back to this one. Hold on. Let's go back to the. So you can see like I'm pulling in these fonts or these JPEGs right here, and you can see there's like a light purple and a dark purple, and the dark purple is actually when it's actively being downloaded, because the browser can, like, you know, have the connection open, download chunks, and then pause while it downloads something else, and the browser will figure out how to do that. At the bottom of all this, you have a couple different cool charts, including CPU utilization, which will tell you, like, obviously how hard your CPU is working, and the bandwidth utilization right here. So how much is being downloaded. So you can see, like, after 18 seconds, both the CPU and bandwidth kind of like drop off right there. The browser main thread is showing up right here, and you can see like it will also tell you if your page is also interactive. So you can see there's like little areas in here where the main thread is very active, and that means the page isn't interactive. So like if I go ahead and hit, you know, a button right, you know, at this like 14 seconds in, it's going to take a good amount of time before the JavaScript can actually respond to that, and that's obviously a negative thing. There's a couple cool things about web page test. Also, you can also customize the waterfall right here, and I have two monitors. I have like a big monitor, which you can see right here, and then I have my little monitor below. And one of my favorite things to do is I like to make this like super wide. So I make this like, say, like 4,000 wide, and I can generate it and open it up in a new window, throw it up on my big old wide monitor, and at that point you can kind of it'll spread things out a little bit more. That's pretty neat. There's a lot of different options in here that you can also play with, and obviously like there's. If you want to learn more about web page tests, and you should, there's YouTube videos from Patrick Meenan. He's the person who created this, and it's fantastic. But some of my favorite resources are on this GitHub link that we gave you right here. And these favorite resources that I have are this guy named Matt Hobbs, who he works for the UK Digital Services, and he has this amazing how to read a web page test waterfall article right here, and also how to read the web page test connection view chart. And he walks you through like and annotates all the different sections. And then what's really valuable for me if you go to the bottom of it, let me get down here. I'm just going to scroll down like this. There's a lot of different, what do you call it? Like things that use cases where he like runs into, what am I getting into here? Did I click on something? Yeah. So I'm going to page up right here. You can, he examines like certain different problems in here, which is pretty fantastic.
By the way, I'm realizing we're down to about 40 minutes here, so we're going to have to probably
crap, yeah. All right,
let's end of the actually.
All right, and I'm also getting I'm getting some feedback that says please don't scroll fast, but yeah, take a look at that type of stuff.
I'm blind, help me.
Yeah, I know. So sorry about that. So let's move on to the next slide here. And I'm going to see if I can find my slides. I have so many windows open at the time. So I think we were on page speed insights here. We talked about this. We talked about your Lighthouse, stat packs, web page tests, real user monitoring. This is something that we're not going to dive deep into, but real user monitoring is a type of performance monitoring where you actually have like a subset of your users or all your users in it. And there's a navigation timing API that you can say like, you know, this is when it starts, this is when it ends, and you can get these stats back. This is the data that I believe that Chrome User Experience Report corrects, but you can actually do this on yourself too. And there's also like lots of like really cool tools, things like Speed Curve, Catch Point, and things like that will generate, you know, different charts for you over time, and that's super useful. Useful techniques. We're going to go through some best practices, including things like images, JavaScript, network, and everything else. I have this great picture of an images because images typically hog the bandwidth, right? So we want to identify, right? Isn't that good? We want to identify large images, and you can do this once again through dev tools, you know. So like if I go to events.drupal.org and I reload and I can look at this type of stuff. I'm going to just sort by size right here, and we're going to see what we have. So like right here, we have a 0.5 MB image right here. That's pretty bad. But on the Europe site, so Europe 2020, I believe is the URL, we have that one image is 6 megabytes. This image right here is 6 megabytes right here, which is, you know, obviously not super great. Is that the 6 megabyte image? I don't even know. But the fact that we have a 6 megabyte image in here, this is the type of stuff that you could easily do. Lazy loading images. My text is so small it's blurry. So I don't know why my text is blurry. I don't know if there's anything I can do about that right here without adjusting my slides. So I apologize for that. Lazy loading images is a useful technique. It used to have to be done through JavaScript, but now you can do it natively through adding a loading equals lazy attribute onto your images, which is super valuable. This is supported by Chrome and I think now by Firefox. In addition to that, it's worth noting here that iframes also support the same attribute, so you can lazy load your iframes. Yeah, so it's supported by all modern browsers, and it doesn't hurt old browsers. And I'm kind of neglecting Safari here. I don't know if Safari is going to be implementing it or not, but something that has implemented it is Drupal. Yay! So Ben mentioned this earlier, but I think Google actually sponsored some of the work on this. But the native lazy loading of Drupal is enabled by of images is enabled by default in Drupal 9.1. Modern image formats are super useful. So you're familiar with traditional image formats like a GIF, pronounced with a soft G. Ben, do you say GIF or GIF? Just out of curiosity.
I said GIF for graphics, but then I've been told that my reasoning is flawed. So,
all right.
GIF.
JPEGs are useful for complex photos. PNGs are useful if you have transparency, but if you don't have transparency, I don't believe you should be using PNGs. SVGs are very useful, and they're typically like if you have some graphics that are either icon size or just have like they're vector, and they can be very, very performant, which is super awesome. But there's newer image formats such as WebPs. WebPs have a very small file size. They support alpha transparency similar to PNGs, and they're supported by all modern browsers. And the caveat on that is only the most recent version of Safari on Big Sur supports that, but Firefox and Chromium-based browsers do support that. There's a module called the WebP module, which will use like the PHP libraries, like such as ImageMagick and like I guess was it the GD library to use WebP, and so you can integrate that in today. There's a new format called AVIF. That's how Ben pronounces it, or AVIF, and it's even smaller than WebP, and it's derived from I believe like the AV1 video, but it's very similar, but it's supported by less browsers. Hopefully, this will be more be more prevalent later. There's a Drupal module for that called AVIF. It uses an API to actually do the conversion, because GD does not support that. You can't convert it yet. I don't know if ImageMagick supports that, but
It
yeah.
does
So
actually.
you can use
And GD
it.
does.
Does?
Yeah, but I'm working on GD right now to make it support that. But ImageMagick already does support it. The GD is
Cool.
still a work in progress.
Yeah, so there could be like a, if you have ImageMagick, there could be a Drupal module that does it, internal to Drupal on, without an API, which would be very useful. You can use these modern image formats today by using the picture element. So you can see like right here on the right-hand side, there's this type attribute, and this type attribute will, hint to the browser what type of image this is, and if it is a particular, if it's not something the browser will support, they will download something that they do support, and that's super useful. We were going to demo Squoosh, but I don't know if we like really have time here. We have like a half an hour left. Squoosh.app is the URL. I'm just going to load this up right now. This is a really, really good place to play with images. You can like load this image, and it's just really cool things where you can select different options here, and it's really fantastic because it uses the browser to do this, and it's a very, very cool PWA too, and it uses WebAssembly to do all those conversions, which is really, really neat. Responsive images are something that's included in Drupal core. So responsive images will load different images based on your viewport size. And there's a couple different ways to do that, including source sets and the picture element. The picture element's kind of useful because you can have different aspect ratios too. This is like really, really cool. This is included in Drupal core with Drupal 8 and later, and it's a contrib module for Drupal 7. It's not enabled by default. You have to turn it on, and then you have to configure it. The documentation on how to configure this is at the bottom, but this is something that's super useful for those large hero images like that you see on like the events.drupal.org. JavaScript I have this great graphic for JavaScript because JavaScript tends to be a big culprit with web performance. Even though JavaScript is amazing, the less JavaScript, the better. And it's useful to recognize as you're downloading JavaScript that not all bytes are created equal. 1 megabyte of JavaScript does not take the same amount to process as 1 megabyte of images. When the browser can output the images very, very quickly, but the JavaScript that has to parse it, has to compile, it has to do like the just-in-time compiling or everything else to do, and then has to execute that JavaScript. That takes a lot more time than it does to render images. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's best practice to create smaller JavaScript bundles, and this, can go into the face of like aggregating your JavaScript, but you want your bundles to be like in the neighborhood of 200 kilobytes or less, because what that does is that enables your event listeners to jump in and respond to user input as the browser is parsing or compiling or executing. You want to keep an eye on long tasks. Like if you have a task that is long, you might want to somehow async it or something like that, so the browser can respond to those user inputs. This is a great image right here for the JavaScript main thread. Like JavaScript main thread, like it runs and nothing else can happen until it will run one thing at a time, and it only runs on one processor. Now, my understanding is if you have multiple tabs, your different version or your different tabs can run on different processors, but the JavaScript main thread will just run on one processor. Identifying and removing third-party scripts is super amazing. I have this demo that I'm going to be very, very quick through for Ben, but I'm going to go back to web page test, and I'm going to go into my test history, and let's set this for 7 days right here and hit update. Now imagine if I just ran these right now. I can compare these what do you call them, waterfalls. To get this, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the scripting element right here. So I'm just going to go to the script tag right here, and let me get back to this right here, and I'm gonna take this text that I have right here, and oops, let me hit presenter view. I'm going to take this text right here, and I'm going to throw this into the scripting, and then I would hit the start test button. And what this script does, it says block domains accept, and I have a list of space separated domains where I'm only going to allow connections to these domains. Then I type in navigate right here, and then navigate will tell it to go to that particular website, and it'll load. Now I can add a label in here. You can see, like, under test settings, there's this label. So I can type in here like no external scripts or no external content, and I can compare these, and I can check these boxes and hit the compare button right here. And what's really interesting is you can kind of see how these will how these differentiate. And you can hit this create video button right here, which is super useful. And the create video button will let me see if I have it will actually create a video, and it will show everything. Like, it'll show the loading, and you can download that video, and you can maybe show that to marketers and say, hey, listen, this is negatively impacting our first paint or something like that. Now, something that these videos do not show is it does not show things like the CPU utilization, but it will show it down here. So you can see the browser main thread for the waterfall without external domains is pretty decent, but with the external domains we saw earlier was very, very clogged up. So that's something that's super useful right now. With developer tools, you can do something kind of similar, which is pretty neat. So I'm going to go to the web page. I'm just going to go to the performance tab. I'm going to reload, and I'm only going to let this go for a second here because we don't have a heck of a lot of time. But what's really interesting is you can zoom in, and you can actually kind of group by subdomain and see what's going on. I'm going to show you how to do that as soon as it's done processing. So I'm gonna maybe zoom in right here, and I'm gonna get out of this pane, and then I'm going to, yeah. Oh, so you can see I have the summary. It shows me the amount scripting, the amount loading, the amount rendering, and things like this. But what's really interesting is you can go to this bottom up view right here, and there's a bunch of grouping. So something that's really useful is grouping by a subdomain. And you can see like, okay, well, 16% of this is coming from the tabula, 15% is coming from TinyPass. Like you can look at all these culprit domains down here that are causing issues. And I think that's super valuable. Something else that's like really important is avoiding the forced reflows. So forced like layouts and reflows are when the browser actually like takes the page and puts it out, like figures out how everything fits together. And you can animate stuff like that, but it's not a great idea. You can animate. Let me see. I think I have it a little bit later there, but you typically don't want to animate that, and you also don't want to like. There's certain JavaScript properties, like including the get client rect bound, where it figures out where an element fits into a page. If you run that based on like either like scroll events or resize events or things like that, it will cause layout thrashing. And you can see things like this up here, where like the little ticks up here, these little red ticks will indicate when your browser's running at less, like around 30 frames per second or less. There's a cool gist right here from Paul Irish that actually shows animations of things that will cause reflow. And you just want to avoid this if at all possible. There are things, sometimes you do need to animate that stuff, but try to avoid it. We're moving into network now, and I also want to talk about like CDNs. So CDNs like really help with that time to first byte for that initial document and any type of static assets that you have up here. This is something I did yesterday right here. This is the time to first byte for lullabot.com with and without a CDN, and I measured this by just like, of course, running lullabot.com normally, which has about a 20 millisecond time to first byte. But if I added just kind of a random query string at the end, so it bypassed that CDN for the first time, it was half a second time to first byte. So we literally added like about a half a second onto the time. That adds up. Like that's a lot of time. Resource hints are very, very useful. Resource hints are things that you put into are like almost like meta tags that you put into the head of your document, and you can preload and pre-connect. Preload is useful for loading things like fonts. Pre-connect is useful for connecting to other domains. You can see preload right here. This is an old version of lullabot.com where we had a React app, and we preloaded a certain JavaScript bundle right here. You can see that link rel preload works. Now this works under modern browsers, but it doesn't work under things like Internet Explorer, but Internet Explorer will just ignore it. You can see right here we're using pre-connect. We're connecting to a couple other domains, and this is like super useful because, as I mentioned earlier, the connection time to these different domains take a little bit of time. But if you pre-connect, you do this earlier in the process. You can do that pre-connect while the browser's doing everything else, and so there's not as much of a penalty. You can do this all together. You can see in this particular case right here that we're preloading a number of font files, and we're also preloading some background images. Background images are nice to preload if they're above the fold area, because in order for a background image to come in, you need to the browser needs to look at the CSS, and it creates this chain of dependencies and things like that. You can see for the particular background images here, I'm using the media attribute to limit of when they're coming in. Nowadays, I typically try not to use background images. I tend to use absolutely positioned image tags with the object fit attribute. I'm not gonna. I don't know if we like really have time to do. I set up a couple links within that Google or within that document that we have. Let me open that up right here. And I encourage everybody to kind of do it themselves. I have a couple different tugboat demos right here where it shows these fonts. It shows lullabot.com with and without like various regressions, like right here. So you can see there's a this is a version of lullabot.com where I removed the resource hints. This is a version of lullabot.com where I removed the external fonts, and this is a version of lullabot.com where I introduced layout thrashing. And so if you scroll down, you can see how things are very, very janky right here, because I just kind of took away any type of optimizations that I did. And those are kind of super useful for like maybe getting used to profiling. So I encourage you to like mess around with those in things like, Chrome developer tools and web page test. HTTP2 and HTTP3 are modern versions of the hypertext transfer protocol, and it's very useful to use these. With the old legacy like HTTP1, the browser would have to connect for every single resource, and it would only download like 6 or so at a time, and then it would have to reconnect. It created this long waterfall view. HTTP2 and HTTP3 have different ways where they manage that, where they create different streams. HTTP3 is not deployed everywhere yet. I've seen Google use it before, but HTTP3 is really neat because it doesn't use the TCP part of TCP/IP. It uses UDP, and then it has this other protocol that kind of manages like error conditions and stuff like that. Makes things very quickly. You can see there. I showed this earlier, but there's a protocol column within developer tools that will show you what you're using. If you use modern CDNs, they're usually using HTTP2, so that's a great way to go. I talked a little bit about watching your HTTP request count. It used to be like really, really important, but with HTTP2, it's not as important as it is, but it's something to keep an eye on. And that shows up right down here in developer tools, and I'm sure web page test has somewhere too. Prefetching is really, really useful. So you can use this link rel prefetch, and there's some JavaScript APIs for it too. And you can preload pages that might be in the viewport, or preload different pages. If I'm on a particular page and I know that a user usually navigates to this other page, I can go ahead and I can go ahead and preload that. The browser will store it, or prefetch that. The browser will store it into cache, so when it loads it's pretty instantaneous. There's a really, really awesome library called QuickLink that's created by Google Chrome Labs that will fetch prefetch links that are in the viewport. There's a Drupal module that called QuickLink, also a corresponding one. I'm the one who's the maintainer and wrote that. And that's really cool. It gives you options. You can prefetch certain domains, or you can only prefetch certain domains, or you can block things to defetch or prefetch. It gives you a whole bunch of really cool options. We use that on lullabot.com, and you can actually see on lullabot.com, like as you scroll down the page, as these links enter the viewport, you can see if you have developer tools open, you can see them come in. One thing to note with this is that you want to keep an eye, like I've had some feedback that like one particular customer that was on a popular hosting platform, like QuickLink will download a lot more data, and it could take you over to a tier, and you might be paying more money. That's something just to keep an eye on. Another very important thing to keep an eye on is avoiding chaining dependencies right here. So this is a profile of an earlier version of lullabot.com where we were a React app, and there was this great, well, not great, but there was a situation where we had an API call to another API call to another API call to another API call to another API call to another, and once again to another, before it would actually like pull down this information. And in the meantime, you can see like there was like this 2 seconds of wait time here before the browser would actually get these images, and you can kind of see that in the waterfall view. This is the type of things that you just want to kind of take a look at. It's typically a good idea to avoid external dependencies, such as things like Google Fonts or external like CDNs that pull things in like jQuery, because the browser has to reach out to those domains and pull those in. And you can see that, and you can usually profile that pretty easily within the waterfall charts. You can see the start render and this particular waterfall right here is dependent on the Google Font style sheet. And everything else. Ben, do you want to talk a little bit about AMP? I
Yeah,
think we have like 17 minutes left, so
that's
we're
pretty
getting
fast.
through it really quick.
Yeah, you were quick
Yeah.
with those last slides there. You got through this last 97
Holy cow!
slides so
These
fast.
things go on so quick. Yeah.
Yes. By the way, there are a couple of questions in the Q&A area. Please add more questions there if you'd like to. There aren't so many so far. I've
Hmm.
answered a couple already that via just the text, but we also can answer some questions live too. For example, someone asked about adding a region of the world or country selection to Lighthouse. That's a really interesting idea, and I don't even see actually a way to filter by that in the Crib User Experience report. There probably is one. It's such a basic idea. I will look into that and ask people about this one because it would be an obvious feature to have.
Yeah, and note
Anyway,
that you can do that with web page test.
yeah, that's true. You can select different places for the device to be in. So
Hmm.
anyway, AMP, we didn't talk about this yet at all, but it is a way to make sites faster that's supposed to be easy and by default. So the idea of AMP essentially is it's a web components library you can use to, instead of writing your own JavaScript, use web components with their own small JavaScript. And thus, instead of writing JavaScript for everything and loading third-party libraries, using what AMP provides. The downside being that if you follow AMP's validation rules, you can't add your own JavaScript except for within a web worker, which you can do. And you can't do all the things you want to do because AMP's goal is to restrict what you could do in order to make things more performant. So AMP has kind of got good use cases, not good use cases. For simpler sites, things that are mostly just content and aren't that interactive, don't require a lot of custom code. A nice way to make a site that's going to be fast by default. For sites that are more interactive, or whether you have to have things like more A/B testing or analytics that AMP doesn't support, it's not as good a use case. It's an open source project. Google started it 5 years ago now, I believe, but now belongs to the OpenJS Foundation. Actually, next slide, please. Here's how AMP looks in person. If you can go to the next slide for me there. Oh, there we go.
Is that good?
Yes, that is the next slide. Thank you. That's how AMP looks. It says HTML. It's just web pages with HTML on them. So this, for example, is how you make a YouTube embed in AMP. It is not using YouTube's own JavaScript. Use this web component called AMP YouTube. AMP does the rest for you automatically. Also, will lazy load this video if it's actually at the bottom of the screen automatically and does various things to optimize. Notice also width and height are in there. That's because AMP requires these things. That prevents content layout shifts because everything's got its size declared in advance. AMP will do other things to also make you be fast. It restricts how much CSS you can have. What was I going to say over here? I think that was it. If you go to the next slide, I'm going a little faster than I was going to go, but let's go faster here. If you go to the next slide here and then you press a button there, then this will pop down on the screen. It turns out that sites that use AMP pass Core Web Vitals criteria at 5 times the rate of non-AMP sites. So to make Core Web Vitals criteria yours, this is the way you can do it. Now, one problem you might have is that maybe the validation rules of AMP are too restrictive for you. The nice thing is, with the changes we discussed about 7 hours ago before in search, AMP will no longer be required for the top stories carousel if you're a publisher. So it becomes more compelling to simply use AMP. And if you want to actually do things that are not valid AMP, you've got to have your own JavaScript on the page or add that analytics pixel that doesn't support. You can just go ahead and do it. And no reason not to do that, except for the fact that if you use AMP, you get into AMP caches that then will serve your page from on Google search, Google's own servers, or on Bing search for Microsoft servers, for example. So you'll lose the benefit of being in the cache, which is just for valid AMP pages. But still, if you're finding yourself struggling making your page faster, AMP is a good way to get there. And also next year, next slide, please. In January, I think it'll be launched, makes AMP even easier to use, which is called Bento AMP, like lovely bento boxes where you can pick out bits of Japanese food in their own little compartments. You'll be able to use AMP components on other web pages as well. This can be done now, but it doesn't always work, maybe. Honestly, it seems to always work now anyway, but they're writing all the components using Preact to guarantee that all the AMP components will work independent of AMP's own runtime. So you'll be able to say, oh, I've got this large image carousel library. I could use AMP carousel. It's just 9K gzipped, and you can save some space. and go on doing this to your page until things are faster. Also, AMP.
So does that, I have a follow-up question for that. Does that mean these components, these Bento AMP components will not require the external AMP JavaScript?
Yes, that's correct. And I think in January, the
Wow.
plan is to have the 30 most popular ones all support that. So
Cool.
that is different. I see a comment about going slower. Yeah, sorry, I'll try to talk a little slower. I really
We have
apologize for that.
11 minutes. Yeah, we have 11 minutes left until Laureline is gonna like kick us out.
Thanks for the reminder about not talking so fast. I talk so fast
Yeah.
anyway, because I get excited about things. Sorry. So anyway, the idea is that you'll be able to use AMP in the way that you want to make your site faster without feeling like you have to use AMP to please the top stories carousel in Google search in some way. Let's go to the next slide here. What is the next slide? Oh yeah, AMP has a really nice WordPress plugin. The Drupal plugin is more basic and not as maintained. The WordPress plugin has been worked on by an agency plus some Google engineers now for a little while. The nice thing is that the team is working on taking out the guts of this plugin and making it usable by anybody, taking out the PHP that's not WordPress specific so that other people can use it for other plugins out there. This will be helpful because the WordPress plugin does things like, for example, go through all your CSS on your site and find all the CSS that's not being used and get rid of it. So it makes CSS smaller by default. So these features will soon be available to other CMSs as well. Okay.
I guess we're going back to me right now. So I want to talk a little bit. I think I mentioned this earlier. I want to talk a little bit about performant animations, and I want to. So there's certain animations that can cause reflow in paints, and those include things like animating background positions and the top left, and margins and paddings. And if you ever like scroll down a page and it's doing like this parallax stuff, and it starts being all janky as it's coming up and down, that's typically because they're animating background position or something like that. A better way to do that is by using properties that do compositing, like transform or opacity. So when you're doing animations, try to do things like transforms and opacity as much as possible. There's sometimes where you can't do that, but just keep that in mind. Talk a little bit about CSS. It's bad practice to base64 encode everything into your CSS. It used to be good practice to do this because it would cut down on your HTTP requests. When when we were on HTTP1, the HTTP requests mattered a whole bunch, so people would embed these images into their CSS files. Right now, that's bad practice because you're taking basically a non-critical resource and you're making it critical. And other than that, you just kind of want to follow like best practices and try to componentize and split up these monolithic style sheets as much as possible. And I don't worry about selector performance. So Ben, what can I do?
I love your CSS slide there. Selector performance, it matters, but not as much as that 2 megabyte images lying on your screen there. So what can I do? Yeah, we have some ideas for things, issues that are underway and under discussion that are seeking volunteers. If you can go to the next slide over here, Pastoral Superhero, this already happened. This is exciting. Google actually paid some people to do this. It didn't take a lot of code. It took very little code because Drupal is so organized. So you can already now use lazy loading right there in Drupal 9.1 automatically. Let's go to the next slide here, please. Other ideas that are out there, if you had better ways to make images smaller, it's still the most bytes on the web is images. Although, as Mike pointed out, JavaScript byte for byte takes more time. Images are still the most bytes. So there are ideas out there to make it possible to make images smaller, both right when they're created in the first place, when they're first uploaded, and also on the server. If you go to the next slide over here, you'll see the idea of simply using squoosh.app and sticking that right there into Drupal or something similar. So you could, if you're a person loading up a big image, say, okay, here's my image. Oh, I can compress it. Look at that. Now it's only 20K instead of 200K. Super useful. The Squoosh API is available for use. It's all open source. And something like this would make it easier for everyone to make images smaller. Honestly, right now, no CMS really does this. Drupal could be a leader here in making images smaller on the web. Also here, I didn't think I mentioned this before. If AVIF was supported, that would be a great way to make images really small. It currently isn't possible because it's not supported by libgd, but I'm working on this now and I need some help. If you want to help me out with this, let me know, because then it could be possible to do this in PHP GD, and then that could propagate into not just Drupal, but also Joomla, other CMSs. Let's go to the next slide over here. Also, JavaScript minification is important. Make JavaScript small, get rid of those comments, make those gigantic property names smaller. This already is possible with popular modules, but what if it was built into Drupal? Why not do that? Then everyone could do this without actually having to find out that a module exists. And I've seen plenty of Drupal sites that have unminified JavaScript. Everyone does it sometimes. It just happens that way.
Yeah, core can aggregate it, but it doesn't minify it.
Yeah, aggregation is nice, but minifying is also nice. And also, here's an issue over here. This is Fabian's idea. What if not just images, but all content below the fold was lazy loaded? So anything, not just images or iframes, which you can do with HTML, but say things that involve JavaScript and CSS. The best, most complicated sites out there do this already, but Drupal sites could also do it. This is a fascinating idea, and there is a link down there to get involved. And I think this is
yeah, this is an issue right now. Like, so GD already supports WebP, but Drupal does not out of the box without that contrib module. And there's an issue right now to fix that in Drupal core. And honestly, it's the issue looks pretty far along right now. But if anyone is into that type of stuff, the link is at the bottom. And here's a link on where to learn more. So there's tons and tons and tons, and this doesn't even begin to scratch the surface right here, but there's a couple like really cool links up in here. That Smashing Magazine link is just like this huge, huge front-end performance thing, and it's just amazing. There's a couple conferences. I've been to the Performance Matters conference in California before, and there's also a like a similar conference called Performance Now that happens in Amsterdam, and they usually happen every year. But of course, like the coronavirus has changed things. The Performance Now conference in Amsterdam has some dates announced for next year, which is in November, which is like really, really exciting. I'd really like to go to it. And that's our last slide, and we have 4 minutes left, and maybe we could take some questions for these 4 minutes. I know it's
one more here that's in the Q&A, which is WebP isn't always the most compact thing. Is it worth using at all? And I think my answer for that is that it's not always the smallest thing, but it's usually the smallest thing compared to like a PNG or a JPEG. But you're right. You've got to try your image out in different formats and see where it looks the best and where it can be the smallest and choose what's better. In most cases, it's going to be a bunch smaller. And actually, for example, the AMP cache will automatically convert images to WebP because they're usually just smaller and look just as good or better. But you're right, not always.
And I would like to also point out there's a saying called tools, not rules. And what that means is like measure everything. Like if you're implementing a WebP and WebP slows your website down, well, first of all, make sure you're measuring it properly, in the real world conditions. But secondly, if it slows your website down, don't use it. An example of that is like as I was prepping this talk, I'm preloading on Lullabot.com. We're preloading like maybe 5 or 6 fonts. And I, as I was doing my web page test waterfall graphs, like trying to compare, so I've noticed that the ones where I'm doing the preloading is taking longer to do that initial run paint. And I was thinking, like, why is this the case? And I didn't go into actually measuring that, but it's certainly a case where like maybe those are offsetting some other resources that should come in first. So I'm gonna dive into that at some point as soon as I can get time. But the fact is like measure everything, and if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But make sure you're measuring it properly.
Yeah, and along with that, building on that, also use your best judgment, use your human judgment. Metrics are useful and scores are useful, and if people say this is a 47, it's got to be 51 or higher, that's great. But really, just go to your favorite, dev tools kind of thing, throttle to a 3G connection, load up your site, see where it's slow. You can tell, and where it's slow, find those things and make them faster.
And this presentation, there's a question on where this presentation is. So like if you have that GitHub link, it's the right up here. It's the DCEU-webperf. There's a link to the slide deck right at the top, so you can just get there. And yeah,
again over here, I'm going to copy one more time Mike's GitHub, which I actually added a couple of things to. I put some PRs in there during the talk. You can accept those after the talk. Even more links will be there.
I'm not going to accept theirs, no. Declined.
Please.
Yeah, here, let me merge these right now.
Yours.
What was I going to say? And you can also reach out to us. Our contact info is right here under presenters. So, you know, I'm active on Twitter. I don't know if you're as active, but I did notice, Ben, that